Shadow of the Tomb Raider's graphics have been getting a lot of praise lately because of Nvidia's new RTX technology. My RTX 2080 Ti will be here this week, but how is this game performing with some budget graphics cards? I have 8 of them to test for you today. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome to Zach's Tech Turf. Today we're going to be benchmarking Shadow of the Tomb Raider with some popular used budget graphics cards. And if you're new here and you want to see more benchmarking or PC building videos like that super cheap $150 build I did last month, then hit that subscribe button down below and also that notification bell. That way you never miss an episode. But yeah, let's start benchmarking. For today's video, we're going to be benchmarking 8 budget graphics cards, which are all widely used here in late 2018. These cards are the GT 1030, GTX 660 Ti, GTX 750 Ti, GTX 960, GTX 1050 Ti, GTX 1060, the R7 360, and finally the RX 460. If you've been following my other benchmarking videos, then you'll know that for the first time today, I'm swapping in the GTX 1060 3GB card to replace the GTX 650. With the price of graphics cards still going down, you can find the 3GB version of the GTX 1060 for like $130 to $150. I found this one for $130 used. So yeah, this is officially a budget graphics card now. For our testing platform today, I'm going to use the Dell Optiplex that you guys have seen in a ton of other build guide videos. It's rocking an i5 3470 clocked at 3.2 GHz, has 8GB of DDR3 RAM, and I have Shadow of the Tomb Raider installed on a Kingston 120GB SSD. This Dell Optiplex is a perfect testing platform for these cards today because in my opinion, this is something that you would actually buy if you were using one of these graphics cards. To kick off these benchmarks, here's a chart showing every card with the exact same settings, 1080p lowest. I'll show the individual benchmarks with specific settings for each card in just a second. As you can see though, all 8 of these cards can actually handle this game in 1080p, provided you would accept 32 FPS as a playable frame rate. For the upcoming benchmarks with each specific card though, I'm going to show you what settings it would take if you have to game at that 50 to 60 FPS mark, which as you guys probably know by now, that's what I usually aim for. And finally, one more final note before showing these results, I just want to mention that I was using the in-game benchmarking tool for today's testing. Keep in mind that your results will definitely vary on what part of the map you're in for this game, so this was the only way to keep the testing on the same level playing field. Keep your eye in the top left-hand corner during the gameplay footage I'm about to show, because that'll show you the specific data you need to see how the GPU is performing. The first card up was the super budget GT 1030, and this one was definitely a tough one to get in that 50 to 60 FPS mark. I had to crank the settings down to 720p and the lowest settings with no anti-aliasing. This game certainly doesn't look great, but definitely playable at this smooth 52 FPS. Next up was the GTX 660 Ti. Make sure you check out the dedicated video I just made for this card last week. The results are actually pretty surprising. And here in 720p, but with low settings, I got an average FPS of 54. The GTX 750 Ti followed up next, and I actually had to crank the settings back down to 720p in the lowest settings, but here we averaged just above that 60 FPS mark. Getting into what I would consider the more fun graphics cards, the GTX 960 was up next, and here we could finally get into that 1080p resolution, and with the low settings I averaged just above our target 50 FPS mark. The GTX 1050 Ti was up next, and with the exact same settings as the GTX 960, we averaged 1 FPS lower with an average of 50 frames per second. The GTX 1060 3GB model followed up next, aka the new guy on the block, and here with a 1080p resolution and medium settings I averaged 54 FPS. Just want to add on to what I said earlier in the video, we are living in pretty good times when the GTX 1060 made it to one of my budget benchmarking videos. Moving on to the limited stock of AMD cards that I personally own, the R7 360 was up next. This one actually isn't a bad card at its current price. Make sure you check out that dedicated video if you haven't already. And with a 720p resolution and low settings, I averaged 51 FPS. And finally, the last card up today is the RX 460, and in 1080p with the lowest settings, the same settings I used for that chart earlier, I got an average FPS of 56. Well, there you have it. That wraps up my benchmarking video for Shadow of the Tomb Raider with some budget graphics cards. Now feel free to head on over to one of these 2 videos if you haven't seen them yet, and please hit that subscribe button because in the next video, I'm doing a farewell tribute to my GTX 1080 Ti back there because it's only king of the mountain for a couple more days. You don't want to miss that video.